So I appreciate you guys coming out and spending some time with me. So as I said, we're going to chat a bit about Backbone. And before we do, I want to do a little bit of a history lesson, because I'm convinced that for most developers, the world began with the first language they learned. and they don't realize that these ideas came from somewhere else. In fact, on a mailing list, I won't mention which one, somebody asked, basically, why does Java need this newfangled Lambda concept? Really? Lambdas are new? Wow, okay. I didn't realize that. But apparently, Lambdas are a new thing. But some of you may have noticed that there has been a bit of an evolution in the kinds of programs we've written over the last few years. And it started very quietly. There was a line here, a line there. But we've hit this inflection point now, guys, where I really hate to say it, but JavaScript's a first-class citizen. This is no longer that ancillary language that you hope the intern will work on those tasks while you can go work on the serious stuff in the back end. So the challenge, though, for us guys is we need to get our heads wrapped around that new reality. And we have to figure out what does it mean to create applications that are in that style. Because you may have noticed the applications you're using today are different than the ones you used 4 or 5 years ago. Right? So that's really kind of what we're talking about, is how do we embrace these concepts. And by the way, there are a lot of implementations. We're talking about one of them, Backbone. To give you a sense of how rich this space is right now, I did a show in Sweden last year, and I was talking to this panel moderator beforehand. He's like, hey, we should do a panel on this. And I said, yeah, we should talk about JavaScript MVC frameworks. He says, great. Did you hear about, the XYZ framework? I said, no, I haven't heard of that. When did it come out? He said, this morning. That's the world we're in. I mean, probably this week, someone, probably out in the East Coast where they're not going anywhere because they got 30 years of snow, has created a new JavaScript MVC framework. Nature of the beast. In fact, I just saw this morning on Twitter, there's a new dynamic language on the JVM, like Golo or something like that. I hit Instapaper, so I'm not sure much about it. But apparently we've got yet another language running on the JVM. So, all right, let's talk a little bit how we got here. If you go back in time, you may remember this attributed quote. Right? That we're really not going to need that many computers. There's only going to be 4 or 5. Nobody can afford a computer. And that's attributed, but it's fun. It's cute. We're gonna assume he said it. And if you go back to that era, guy, these computers were huge. This whole building would have been a computer. You guys remember that line in Apollo 13? They're walking around, and someday we'll have a computer that fits in a room. Now everybody in this room right now has a computer in their pocket. That's crazy. Right? They were very expensive. They're all managed centrally. They had to get permission to go use it. And for those of you that can remember back to that era, there's a little more gray in your beard or your hair, might remember something that looks like this. I like the little cartoon. That's very fashion forward. And the way we would interact with things like this could be as ugly as that. Right? Doesn't that look like fun? Imagine how joyful that was. One of my early managers, he and I were talking a bit about sort of this era because he went back quite a ways in software. And he said he was talking to someone at his cube, and this guy was literally looking through a stack of cards. He said, hey, what are you doing? He didn't even look up. He said, I'm debugging. I mean, think about that era of programming. For some of you, you actually had to do it, right? So we go back there, and what did we have? What was our programming interface? It was something like this bad boy. That's a way to be super productive. If we were really lucky, we might have had something like this. Yeah, isn't that nice? I mean, it's like the screens and everything. Clearly, by your reactions, a few of you know what I'm talking about. This is fun. We could do all sorts of crazy stuff. Now, you take a step back and you look at that and you go, wow, how do we access the raw power of the mainframe? All this power we could tap into. Did we get a nice, pretty WYSIWYG environment? No. We had everyone's favorite interface, the green screen. Right? We all love these things, right? These things are great. And to a certain extent, there's some benefits here of the good old-fashioned dumb terminal. In fact, I did some tech support in college, and one of my least favorite jobs was we'd get some kind of a failure with one of the terminals, and we'd have to lug another terminal all the way across campus, because inevitably when we'd get that call, the one cart we had would be used by one of our lead tech guys. And so we would always ask the first question, which is what? Is it plugged in? Yeah. So I got one of those calls from the library, like, oh God, terminal's down in the stack. So you just plug in. Oh yeah, no, we totally checked that. So, I hoist one of those things up on my shoulders and walk all the way down there. Yeah, it wasn't plugged in. Oh well. Now, by the way, if you've ever gotten on an airplane, if you've ever rented a car, guess what? You've interacted with a green screen. It's amazing to me how many systems still run in this environment. Now, it isn't all bad. Right? There are some benefits to this approach. First of all, these terminals are free for all practical purposes, incredibly cheap, especially when you contrast it with, like a brand new Retina MacBook Pro, which is on my order list. Right? And they're incredibly easy to maintain. If one broke, guess what? You just grab another one, plug it in, and you're good to go. Everybody's up and running. There's none of this, oh, God, I got to install this, and I got to install that, and I got to go get this. We didn't have any compatibility issues to deal with. It all just worked. There was no DLLs to worry about. But, of course, it wasn't perfect. In fact, it was lacking some things, a lot of things, most of us would say, beyond just good taste. That's something that seems pretty obvious. Clicker's not working here. There we go. I accidentally hit the turn off button. Those UIs sucked. I'm just going to be blunt. These were not the kind of user interfaces that we would call user-friendly. Now, eventually, though, something happened. Computers started shrinking down in size. They were smaller than a room. In fact, some people started to get things like this. Who knows what that is? Trash 80. Trash 80. Here's a fun question. How much RAM did a Trash 80 ship with? 16. Wow, you guys are optimistic. Try 4. Now, when this came out, what did people say about it? Is this going to revolutionize the world? Heck no, it's a toy. Nobody needs one of those toys. Which, of course, gets me to think, ironically, about Gandhi. What did he say? First they just ignore you, then they laugh at you, and eventually you win. It's pretty obvious which one won. Now, of course, part of the reason why they were dismissed as toys is they just weren't very powerful. But push comes to shove, guys, the future was here. We're starting to see this again right now. How many of you guys have some form of a tablet at home? Yeah, a couple of you have got them right here with you today. Mine's in my backpack. I will admit, when the iPad was first announced, I'm kind of like, okay, that sounds kind of cool. And then I touched one. I'm like, wow, how am I going to justify this to my wife? Of course, in this era, we started to create a new kind of application, didn't we? We started to create everyone's favorite app, the client-server app. And it was wonderful. We had things like VB, we had Power Builder, we had Access. This was amazing. We even had better UI. And of course, as we are wont to do, we started taking advantage of all that power. We started to do more things with it. And we very quickly thereafter discovered, uh-oh, there are some downsides to this approach too. This wasn't free. Okay, how many of you know what goes with this acronym? Well, usually goes at the end of DLL if you're a programmer. Hell, right. No, God, it's no fun. I talked to a guy who did a lot of programming in this style in the 90s, and he said that there were times where you would literally just curl up under your desk in the fetal position. It was so painful to get this stuff to work. Right, so that wasn't a lot of fun. Getting this stuff out to customers was a real pain in the keister. We had compatibility issues up the beginning. Your app would install just fine. I'd install my app, and I'd break half of your stuff, or vice versa. That's a lot of fun, especially in a big enterprise. It's enough to make you do this. Just scream at your poor. I think that's actually a ThinkPad, so that makes sense. Some of you have probably played in that arena, have the battle scars to prove it. But of course, as is the norm in our line of work, things change. So in the 90s, all of a sudden, something new appeared. We discovered yet another brand new concept. This one was called the Internet. And we went, hey, wait a second here. We can build a new kind of application. We can build a really thin client that talks to a really powerful server in the back end. It's great. It's brand new. No one's ever done this before. Wait a minute. That does sound familiar. The ironic thing, guys, if you look at us on our webpage, we call it a submit button. Why? That's what it was called in the green screen. At the end of the day, they're forms with holes in it and a submit button, and that's it. The only thing we gained in the browser was images. And I guess we could, resize it. We weren't stuck in, an 80 by 24, whatever that ridiculous restriction was on the green screen. Okay. But this was better. It had to be, because many of us spent a good chunk of our career rewriting green screen apps as web apps, so it has to be better. Otherwise, why would they pay for it? Why would they pay us? Now, for us, it was better because we didn't have client issues, did we? As long as it ran in the browser was our abstraction layer. Well, we did have one client issue, didn't we? Good friend IE. We are so close to killing IE6. Although I made that comment a couple of years ago, because if you notice, guys, IE6 pretty much is on the way out. I mean, if you're on any operating system other than XP, you're not on IE6. And so I mentioned this to a no fluff crowd, and one of the guys says, "Not us." And I said, "Well, really? You just told me you guys are moving to Windows 7." He said, "Yeah, no, we got Microsoft to give a special build that includes IE6." Wow. You poor bastard. I mean, if that's not enough to get you off IE6, going to a new operating system, nothing is. You are stuck on IE6 forever.
You could be on IE7, but the clients are still on IE6.
It's IE6 is the bane of my existence. I'm happy to just finally kick it to the curb. So this is a good thing, you know. But to be honest, guys, these UIs weren't great. We'd really gone backwards, and most customers noticed that, and they weren't very happy with it.